All right, welcome back to Epistemology and Apologetics. And today we're finally going to get to our philosophic fallacies. And so I'm going to share my screen. I've been saving some documents for us to go over. Fine. That's not what I want to share. All right, what do I want to start with? This is a really great resource. Normally, I don't recommend encyclopedias or dictionaries for college level academics, but this is a peer reviewed philosophic encyclopedia from Stanford University, and it's constantly being updated. And to me, this is like solid. So you're welcome to use this as a source if you need it. And they do just such a great job in explaining what philosophic fallacies are. And there's two broad categories. There's formal and informal philosophic categories, but I don't even know that we have to worry about that so much, in that I just want to give you a sampler and kind of like an introduction to what philosophic fallacies are. So let's just look at their definition real quick together. And then I'm going to move to some a little bit easier to follow examples. So two competing conceptions of fallacies are that they are false but popular beliefs, and that they are deceptively bad arguments. These we may distinguish as the belief and argument conceptions of fallacies. Academic writers who have given the most attention to the subject of fallacies insist on, or at least prefer, the argument conception of fallacies. But the belief conception is prevalent in popular and non-scholarly discourse. As we shall see, there are yet other conceptions of what fallacies are, but the present inquiry focuses on the argument conception of fallacies. So you can tell they're already going like super deep waters, making these sorts of distinctions even between philosophical fallacies themselves. Okay, so basically, in a nutshell, philosophical fallacies are poor reasoning or faulty reasoning. And we use them all the time. And it's wonderful once you start to get a catalog of these things in your head, you will not be able to help whether you're listening to a friend or family member in a conversation, whether you're watching the news, whether you're listening to your professor or your preacher. You're going to be going, wait, isn't that philosophical fallacy we talked about in class? And so I just love keeping track and making little notes. And like I think I mentioned, my Facebook page right now is just overflowing with philosophic fallacies from the left, from the right, from the middle. Hopefully, I'm not doing any, but if you ever see me do one, please nicely point it out to me so I can make adjustments. All right. I found this article, which, can you see this article with the African American woman picture? Is that showing it? Okay. So 15 logical fallacies you should know before getting into a debate. What is it? They'll probably explain it a little better. A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning common enough to warrant a fancy name. Knowing how to spot and identify fallacies is a priceless skill. It can save you time, money, and personal dignity. There are two major categories of logical fallacies, which in turn break down into a wide range of types of fallacies, each with their own unique ways of trying to trick you into agreement. Okay, this is much easier than the Stanford, right? So the formal fallacy is a breakdown in how you say something. The ideas are somehow sequenced incorrectly. Their form is wrong, rendering the argument as noise and nonsense. An informal fallacy denotes an error in what you are saying. That is, the context of your argument. The ideas might be arranged correctly, but something you said isn't quite right. The content is wrong or off kilter. So the formal fallacy, it may have to do with the word order or how you're using words. And the informal is you're just giving bad information. And what they're going to do is they're going to give us a little sampler of some of the top fallacies. And here's their little list of where they're going. So, and in each one, they're going to describe it and then give you an example of how it works. So we'll just work through this and then we'll have discussions on each one. And maybe you can give me some examples from your own lives. First, out the gate, the ad hominem fallacy. I'll never forget on one of my master's level philosophy papers that I submitted, the teacher gave me a F and all he wrote on it in big red letters was ad hominem fallacy. And I was a young zealot at the time, and I just thought, oh, it's these pagan secular humanists at San Diego State, and they just can't handle the truth. So they're trying to act like I'm not thinking logically. The context was I wrote a paper on Martin Heidegger, who was a German philosopher during the time of Hitler. And many philosophers fled the country or were imprisoned. Heidegger actually became a member of the Nazi Party, supported it, and continued to be like the state philosopher. And so my paper was writing about the lack of ethics in Heidegger's philosophy. And I equated his Nazism with his inability to be ethical. See, and my teacher, after I had a couple years to think about it and went back and looked at my paper, my professor was absolutely correct. I didn't deal with Heidegger's arguments or statements. I was simply dealing with him as a Nazi and then taking that information and then implying that because he was a Nazi, his thinking was perverse and wrong. I wasn't taking his thoughts as a standalone. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
Uh, weren't I remember hearing this, I don't necessarily know if it's true or not, but didn't Nazis or Hitler believe like he was some sort of like Christian or like?
He was a Christian. He was a Lutheran, I believe.
Yes.
No, he was Catholic. He was an altar boy.
But didn't like Nazis hold some sort of like idea to Christianity? Or maybe that was just Hitler.
No, very much so.
Okay. Cool. That's all.
Okay. All right. So if you're doing a personal attack, and like if someone says, I think the Republicans would do a better job running this country because of their fiscal responsibility, and your retort was, you smell funny, you're not answering what that person's proposing. You're simply attacking the person. And this idea is, don't attack the person, the homonym or the hominid, attack their thinking. All right. So I don't think we need to beat that one to death. Now, when I went to San Diego Christian College, Christian Heritage back in the day, this was probably the biggest philosophic fallacy that I encountered in so many of my classes. And what would happen is, as my professors were teaching about other worldviews or even other sects of Christianity, instead of giving me a robust explanation of Darwinian evolution or Roman Catholicism or Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons, they created like this really flimsy straw man representation of those different views, and then they just knocked them down one after the other. Now, the problem of that, of course, is when I actually went out and met evolutionists, atheists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, I was unprepared because I got a very flimsy version of their belief system instead of what they actually believe, which affected the way I teach today. It's part of why I try to bring as robust an argument from different worldviews to you as I can, because I want you to get the full strength of what they're saying and suggesting, why it's so appealing. If you just start saying anyone who believes we came from monkeys is an idiot, that's really not going to prepare you to have a conversation with the Darwinian evolutionists who don't believe we came from monkeys anyways. Okay, so anyways. Is that good enough on that one, or do you want to see their example? Okay. Appeal to ignorance, argumentum ad ignorantium. Anytime ignorance is used as a major premise in support of an argument, it's liable to be fallacious. Appeal to ignorance. Naturally, we are all ignorant of many things, but it is cheap and manipulative to allow this unfortunate aspect of the human condition to do most of our heavy lifting in argument. Okay. So here's some examples. No one has ever been able to prove definitively that extraterrestrials exist, so they must not be real. Second example, no one has ever been able to prove definitively that extraterrestrials do not exist, so they must be real. Wait, is that the same thing twice? Did I misread that?
Basically saying the same thing, but it's just kind of flip-flop. Like,
Okay, I see what they're saying. Here it's a negative, and here it's a positive. That's it. What's the one I heard? A lack of evidence does not prove. Oh, the lack of evidence is not an evidence to prove something. Let's see what their little clip is here. I want to see their example.
Welcome back to Fallacies Everywhere with 90 Seconds Philosophy and Cartoons.org. Today we're going to be continuing with fallacies of weak induction, looking at the appeal to ignorance fallacy. Now, the appeal to ignorance fallacy is also known as argumentum ad ignorantium. This is going to be when you claim that simply because something has not yet been proven that it's not the case, or when you claim that simply because something has not yet been disproven that in fact is the case. Basically what this is doing is saying that lacking evidence, we can conclude something. It's going to be a fallacy because you actually need evidence in order to conclude something. Simply because you're ignorant of the evidence doesn't mean you can conclude for or against it.
That's great. So the first example that comes to my mind would be using the empty tomb to prove Jesus rose from the dead. Just because the tomb's empty does not necessarily or logically follow that it's because someone rose. There could be lots of other explanations. Aiden?
What about the Shroud of Turin?
What about it?
Like proving, oh, well, is that God or someone else? So on and so forth.
Yeah, I don't think that has to do with this dilemma. Edward? No, okay. Oh, this is a good one. False dilemma, false dichotomy. This fallacy has a few other names, like the black and white fallacy. This is the either or fallacy. And I must admit, as a rhetorical technique, I have been known to use this just because I know a lot of people are subject to this in their thinking, especially younger people. They're very black and white, either or in their thinking. They haven't necessarily come to this place to realize things can be much more nuanced, or there could be a lot more of a gray scale than something simply being abject black or abject white. And so these either or things. So here we go. A dilemma based on arguments are only fallacious when in fact there are more than the stated options. It's not a fallacy, however, if there really are only two options. For example, either Led Zeppelin is the greatest band of all times or they are not. That's a true dilemma since there really are only two options. A or non-A. It would be fallacious, however, to say there are only two kinds of people in the world: people who love Led Zeppelin and people who hate music. That's great. Some people are indifferent about that music. Some sort of like it or sort of dislike it, but don't have strong feelings either way. Okay, so when you put someone into these, yeah, here's some great ones. Either we go to war or we appear weak. Either you love me or you hate me. And I want to see their example. I'm sure it's going to be a good one.
I'm the only good one.
Do you think you and Mommy did a good job raising me?
Of course we did.
Well, then you obviously taught me right from wrong.
Sure.
And you should trust me to do the right thing.
Wait.
Or you're a bad father. Take your pick.
You're good.
That was a very great use of the either or fallacy. Either you trust me to make the right decision or you're a bad parent. Okay. You could be a very excellent parent and still not trust your children to make the right decisions. All right. This is the one that has just been spilling off my Facebook feed, and it was also been in Congress a lot lately. There have been so many examples. You may have used this fallacy on your parents as a teenager, but you have to let me go to the party. If I don't go to the party, I'll be a loser with no friends. The next thing you know, I'll end up alone and jobless, living in your basement when I'm 30. The slippery slope fallacy works by moving from a seemingly benign premise as a starting point and working through a number of small steps to an improbable extreme. So it's almost like if you take that first step onto that slide, it's not going to end until you go all the way to the bottom. This fallacy is not just a long series of causes. Some causal chains are perfectly reasonable. There could be a complicated series of causes that are all related, and we have good reason for expecting the first cause to generate the last outcome. The slippery slope fallacy, however, suggests that unlikely or ridiculous outcomes are likely when there is just not enough evidence to think so. And I did preview this clip. I thought it was pretty hilarious. This is a direct TV commercial.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
10 on the slippery slope scale. I mean, that was fantastic. Now, there can be grounds for saying if this happens, then this is likely to happen, etc. And so if you can make a well-argumented and founded case, you're not necessarily doing the slippery slope. This is more when you just start making wild claims that if this happens, or if this law is passed, or if this person's elected, or if I don't get this sort of thing, then all these other things are going to follow. Unless you can give real good concrete examples on why that is so, chances are you're probably falling into the slippery slope. Questions on that one? You probably all heard this one. Circular argument. Oh man, I see this so much in theology and even in science, oddly enough. When a person argument is just repeating what they already assumed beforehand. It's not arriving at any new conclusion. We call this circular reasoning. Oh, they used the Bible example. That's the first one I was going to use. The Bible is true. It says so in the Bible. Okay. The other great one These are also called tautologies, Tautolgy, tautologies. And you're basically just restating your premise in a different way. So my all-time favorite is survival of the fittest. That's a tautology. That's a circular reasoning, because you ask, what are the fittest? Those that survive. Why do they survive? Because they're the fittest. It's just like the Bible one. I believe the Bible is true. Why? Because the Bible tells me so. And you just end up in these like little self-referential loops. But you can imagine that's not going to be very convincing to someone who doesn't accept your premise to begin with. All right. Oh, we got to watch the Star Trek example. Spock.
What an escape. Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet. That's why he was assigned command of the Federation's flagship. He's great, all right, but I don't know that he's the best. They gave him command of the flagship because no other captain was as good as he is. Captain Kirk is the Enterprise's commander, and the Enterprise is the Federation's flagship, isn't it? Well, yeah, I guess so. Well, that proves it. Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet. That's why he was assigned command of the Federation's flagship. Excuse me, gentlemen. I couldn't help overhearing. Yes, sir. The argument you are employing, Mr. Kyle, is not logical. In fact, it exhibits the fallacy of petitio principii, also known as circular reasoning or begging the question. The argument seems to make sense. That may be so, but the form of the argument is invalid. Arguments employing this fallacy all assume a premise statement which has the same meaning as the conclusion. You essentially were saying that Captain Kirk is the best starship captain in the fleet and assigned to Starfleet's flagship because no other captain was as good as he is. You employed circular reasoning because the phrase no other captain was as good as he is the same as saying he is the best starship captain in the fleet. Oh, indeed. That is not to say that Captain Kirk is not the best captain in the fleet, Lieutenant. I believe he is. It's just that your argument does nothing to prove it. Thank you, Commander Spock. Yes, I should rethink what I'm trying to say. That would be best.
If only it was so easy.
Even if an argument seems to make sense, it cannot be valid unless the form is valid, and that it does not exhibit one of the logical fallacies, such as petitio principii, or begging the question.
Thanks, Buck. Ooh, here's a good one. Hasty generalizations. A hasty generalization is a general statement without sufficient evidence to support it. A hasty generalization is made out of a rush to have a conclusion, leading the arguer to commit some sort of illicit assumption, stereotyping, unwarranted conclusion, overstatement, or exaggeration. So a lot of hyperbole, where you're just making these over-the-top statements, would fall into this category. Normally, we generalize without any problem. It is a necessary, regular part of language. We make general statements all the time. I like going to the park. Democrats disagree with Republicans. It's faster to drive to work than to walk. Or everyone mourned the loss of Harambe the gorilla. Hasty generalizations may be the most common logical fallacy because there's no single agreed upon measure for sufficient evidence. Indeed, the above phrase, all the time, is a generalization. We aren't literally making these statements all the time. We take breaks to do other things like eat, sleep, and inhale. These general statements aren't addressing every case every time. They are speaking generally, and generally speaking, they are true. Sometimes you don't enjoy going to work. Sometimes Democrats and Republicans agree. Sometimes driving to work can be slower than walking. And okay, not everyone likes gorillas, I guess. There is no set rule for what constitutes enough evidence. In this case, it might be possible to find reasonable comparison and prove that claim is true or false. But in other cases, There's no clear way to support the claim without resorting to guesswork. The means of measuring evidence can change according to the kind of claim you are making, whether it's in philosophy or in the sciences, or in a political debate, or in discussing house rules for using the kitchen. A much safer claim is that Apple computers are more expensive than many other computer brands. And this is good. This last paragraph, and this was just drilled into me over and over again as a philosopher. A simple way to avoid this is to add qualifiers to your statements. So you add things like sometimes, often, maybe, it seems to be the case. And I just think it's a helpful way to avoid this sort of argument or this sort of clash you can get with people when you speak in these absolute sorts of terms. And any comments on that one? Do you understand the value of making qualifying statements? Now, some things you may not want to qualify, that you believe absolutely 100% all the time. So be it. But I guess my qualifier there would be, I believe this is true, not I know this is true 100% of the time. And we had that discussion. This is a great one. Usually I get so caught up in the conversations, I don't often realize it when it's happening. And once again, I confess I have been known to use this one occasionally when I get into a heated argument or discussion with someone and I just see it going nowhere. So I'll throw a red herring into the conversation. Okay. The red herring fallacy is a distraction from the argument, typically with some sentiment that seems to be relevant, but isn't really on topic. This tactic is common when someone doesn't like the current topic and wants to detour into something else. Something easier or safer to address. A red herring fallacy is typically related to the issue in question, but isn't quite relevant enough to be helpful. Instead of clarifying and focusing, it confuses and distracts. Okay, I want to see their example. So, switching the debate between is vanilla or chocolate the best flavor ice cream, to the next thing you know, we're talking about freedom and choice. Brilliant. And it happens so seamlessly, unless you're paying attention, you may completely get sucked into that distraction and forget your whole other argument you were trying to have. I'm teaching you these so you can identify them and hopefully not use them, not as clever ways to mislead people. Okay, just wanted to clarify the use of these tools. Oh man, we've been seeing this one a lot. I didn't realize there was a fancy name for it. I don't even know how to pronounce this one, sorry. Tu quoque, Latin for you too, is also called the appeal to hypocrisy because it distracts from the argument by pointing out hypocrisy in the opponent. This tactic doesn't solve the problem or prove one's point because even hypocrites can tell the truth. Focusing on the other person's hypocrisy is a diversionary tactic. In this way, using the you too typically deflects criticism away from yourself by accusing the other person of the same problem or something comparable. If Jack says, maybe I committed a little adultery, but so did you, Jason, Jack is trying to diminish his responsibility or defend his actions by distributing blame to other people, but no one else's guilt excuses his own guilt, no matter who else is guilty. Jack is still an adulterer. Well, I would also call this the whataboutism. We've been hearing that in the news a lot lately, right? Where a political figure or party or candidate or something will do something, and then the other side will go through their files, go through their press clips, go through their interviews and be like, yeah, well, what about this, right? And so instead of dealing with the issue at hand, it keeps bringing up other things to distract and deflect. Questions, comments? The causal fallacy is any logical breakdown when identifying a cause. You can think of causal fallacy as a parent category for several different fallacies about unproven causes. One causal fallacy is the false cause or non causa pro causa, not the cause for a cause fallacy, which is when you conclude about a cause without enough evidence to do so. Consider, for example, since your parents named you Harvest, they must be farmers. It's possible that the parents are farmers, but that name alone is not enough evidence to draw that conclusion. That name doesn't tell us much of anything about the parents. This claim commits the false cause fallacy. Post hoc is short for after this, therefore, because of this. This fallacy happens when you mistake something for the cause just because it came first. Okay. Just because this came before, that doesn't mean this caused that. A lot of superstitions are susceptible to this fallacy. For example, yesterday I walked under a ladder with an open umbrella indoors while spilling salt in front of a black cat, and I forgot to knock on wood with my lucky dice. That must be why I'm having such a bad day today. It's bad luck. Okay. Everyone good on that one? Yeah, I don't know this one either. Fallacy of sunk cost. Huh. Sunk cost is an economic term for any past expenses that can no longer be recovered. For example, after watching the first episodes of Battlestar Galactica, you decide the show isn't for you. Those 6 episodes are your sunk cost. But because you've already invested roughly 6 hours of your life in it, you rationalize that you might as well finish it. All apologies to Edward James Olmos, but this isn't good economics, so to speak. It's more cost than benefit. This is interesting. Psychologically, we are susceptible to this behavior when we crave the sense of completion or a sense of accomplishment, or we are too comfortable or too familiar with this unwieldy project. Sometimes we become too emotionally committed to an investment, burning money, wasting time, and mismanaging resources to do it. And I get that. I mean, whether that's in a relationship or a course or a hobby, when we invest a certain amount of time or energy into something, we don't want to let it go, even though continuing is just going to cost us more time and energy and not to get the results we want. Appeal to authority. This, in real simple terms, is you simply say, well, my mama said this was true, so it must be true. It could be the Bible. The Bible said it. I believe it. That settles it. Or you could be more fundamentalist and say, the Bible said it, and whether I believe it or not, that settles it, right? Yeah, that's who I grew up with. But it could be any authority. It could be science. It could be a historian. It could be an economist. It could be a theologian. It could be a philosopher. It could be, and yeah, we want to appeal to experts and authorities, but just because an authority says something is true, especially if it's not even in their realm or discipline, it doesn't make it so. That's it. Questions or comments on that one? Equivocation happens when a word or phrase or sentence is used deliberately to confuse, deceive, or mislead by sounding like it's saying one thing, but actually saying something else. Equivocation comes from the roots equal and voice and refers to two voices. A single word can say two different things. Another word for this is ambiguity. When it's poetic or comical, we call it a play on words. But when it's done in a political speech, an ethics debate, or in an economics report, for example, and it's done to make the audience think you're saying something that you're not, that's when it becomes a fallacy. Sometimes this is not a fallacy per se, just a miscommunication. The equivocation fallacy, however, has a tone of deception instead of just a simple misunderstanding. Often this deception shows up in the form of euphemisms, replacing unpleasant words with nicer terminology. For example, a euphemism might be replacing lying with the phrase creative license, or replacing my criminal background with my youthful indiscretions, or replacing fired from my job with taking early retirement. When these replacement words are used to mislead people, they become the equivocation fallacy. This also, I believe, can happen when you're using one word, but you're using it to mean multiple things. And so you use it one way, and when someone calls you on it or challenges you, you revert to the other meaning. And then if someone challenges you on that, you go back to a different meaning. And so it's almost like a slippery fish or eel fallacy in that you keep equivocating, or you're so ambiguous in what you're saying that no one can really pin you down or hold you to account of it. I want to see their example for this one. Oh, they didn't give us a video. Bummer. Maybe my other clip will have it. Appeal to pity. Truth and falsity aren't emotional categories, they're factual. So yeah, you can't appeal to things like pity or things when you're doing logical fallacies. I'm afraid to watch The Simpsons. And this one you've probably all heard about before. Bandwagon fallacy. It's like, man, I got cured of this one real early as a kid when I tried to use it on my dad. Like, but Dad, everyone else is doing it. Everyone else is growing their hair over their ears, or everyone else can go to the Friday night movie, or other people can listen to rock and roll channels on the radio. And my dad just would have none of it. He'd be like, right is right. It doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. And so, but the bandwagon is trying to get you to feel like, hey, everyone's on board, everyone's doing it, so it must be okay. Let's see what their example was. Looks like a commercial. Oh, maybe not.
People use nonsense and fallacies all the time, often without realizing it. We need to recognize the nonsense to become aware and try to avoid using them. According to James Freeman, in the past, politicians rode around towns on wagons that carried bands for political campaigns. Supporters would literally jump on the wagon to show support, hence the term bandwagon.
That's funny.
According to Gula, the bandwagon fallacy is an emotional appeal to people and their need to belong. He also suggests that if many people are doing or supporting something, then it must be right. Closely related to the bandwagon fallacy are the argumentum ad populum and the appeal to status. Argumentum ad populum is an emotional appeal to a crowd or group. Appeal to status is people believing a certain label or name brand makes them more elegant, important, or worldly. America's team is an example of the bandwagon fallacy being used as a slogan. There are many teams in America, and not everyone is a fan of the Dallas Cowboys.
Nope.
Ex-Dallas Cowboys quarterback Troy Aikman said in an interview for Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket, "I think for a large part, and the fans don't want to hear this, a lot of people that attend sports in this town, they're there because it's kind of just a place to be seen. I didn't know anybody who went to Rangers games. And then when they started winning and going to World Series, everybody's wearing Rangers hats and saying, 'Oh yeah, I'm a big Rangers fan.' I've always said that Dallas isn't so much a sports town as it is a winner's town." This is an example of both appeal to status and the bandwagon fallacy. Troy Aikman claims people in Dallas are there to be seen. This means you are somebody if you go to a game. Also, Aikman claims people began supporting the Rangers only after they began winning. According to the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, bandwagon becomes a fallacy when people are swept up by the excitement of a new idea or new fad and to unquestionably give it too high of a degree solely on the grounds of its new popularity.
Oh yeah, you see it all the time in advertisement, right?
Guys are doing it with girls, and girls are doing it with other girls. Some go online and do it with complete strangers. Some people like to do it hardcore.
So anyways, this idea of everyone's doing it, or it's popular, or you're just getting swept up in the moment, and that kind of rounds out, I believe, the 15 from that particular source. I think under, whoops. Is it showing our weekly lessons? Okay. If you go to week 1, I did put some links to these. This is the Plato site. What's this one? I think that was another one. That's the one we just watched, right?
Welcome to Epistemology and Apologetics.
And that's me. We don't want that one. Oh, I put it in week 2. That's what. I also put a Dropbox here in week 2 for you, for your personal epistemology. So and I can't remember if I put a prompt for you. Let me just check real quick. Those of you that, did any of you do it yet? Was there a prompt, Aiden?
For what?
For the personal epistemology paper?
I don't remember. You just had like a list of questions that you wanted us to answer or insight on, I think.
It was in the syllabus.
Okay.
Got it.
So if you don't see it there, it's in the syllabus. So. I think these might be the same 15, but I'm not sure. I really like this quick, but this might be a nice little refresher for you. And she goes pretty quickly, but I'm just gonna run through these and then we'll have a little talk about them.
Hey guys, welcome to this video on logical fallacies. When creating a logical argument, there are many different aspects that have to come together to ensure that your argument is sound and does not contain any flaws. One of these aspects is avoiding what we call logical fallacy. A logical fallacy is an error of reasoning that will weaken your argument and, in most cases, undermine it completely. Today, we're going to look at the 10 most common logical fallacies. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning or circular argument is when the argument is restated rather than proven. In other words, instead of explaining why something is or isn't true, you just fall back on the original argument as proof. Here's an example. Opium is sleep-inducing because it has a sleep-inducing quality. You haven't really explained why opium is sleep-inducing. You just confirm that it is in fact inducing. A typical formula for circular reasoning is A is true because B is true, and B is true because A is true. Another example of this would be the wind is invisible because I can't see it, and I can't see it because it's invisible. When constructing an argument, make sure to avoid this kind of logic by being as specific as possible about your proof. Hasty generalization. A hasty generalization is when someone makes a sweeping statement without considering all of the facts. For example, if a man walks through a town for the first time and sees 10 people, all of them children, he might conclude that all the town's residents are children. This argument fails to explore all of the data surrounding the topic and attempts to suggest a conclusion based on this limited knowledge. This is also known as overgeneralization and is best avoided by exploring and presenting every aspect of an argument topic. Slippery slope. A slippery slope is a conclusion based on the premise that one small step will lead to a chain of events resulting in some significant event, which is usually negative. In other words, if we allow A to happen, then an unwanted Z will eventually happen, which means that A should not happen. Here's an example. If you don't study on Saturdays, your grades will suffer. If your grades suffer, you won't graduate school with high honors, which means you won't get a good job. Since you won't have a good job, you'll have to live on the street. This implies that not studying on Saturdays will result in eventually being homeless. The problem here is that the main issue is being covered by extreme hypotheticals with no real proof to support the argument. Straw man. A straw man argument is a technique where someone distorts an opponent's claim so that it's easier to refute or someone tries to refute a point when made by giving a rebuttal to a point they did not make. For example, if someone said schools should be more lenient with standardized testing, a straw man reply to this would be, if we stop giving tests in schools, we are going to raise an ignorant generation that won't have the skills to live in the real world. This fallacy serves to undermine an honest and rational debate with unfounded claims.
Yes.
Ad hominem. An ad hominem is an attack on a person's character or personal attributes in order to discredit their argument. For example, a mother might reject the judgments of a male pediatrician because he has never been a mother and could possibly understand the child's situation. She has done nothing to directly oppose the doctor's argument, but has instead tried to undermine his judgment without actually having to engage with it. False dichotomy. A false dichotomy or false dilemma occurs when an argument presents 2 points while disregarding or ignoring others in order to narrow the argument in one person's favor.
To me, this one's so interesting because I think with postmoderns who have moved more towards a relativistic theory of knowledge, instead of like absolute truth claims, it's more like subjective truth claims, that they really, their red flags go up if you just give them 2 choices. They at least want a third choice, if not 7, 8, a dozen, 1,000 choices, right? They're not content with just either or, this or that, black or white. And I'm not either. I mean, when someone gives me an offer like, would you like to take a pay cut or lose your job? It's like, is there a third option? Is there someone else I could talk to? I mean, I don't like those 2 choices. Are those really the only 2 choices? Could we be creative? Could we negotiate? Is there something in between there?
This is also known as either or fallacy. Here are a couple of examples. You were either for us or against us. I thought you were a good person, but you didn't donate to the charity last year. There are only 2 options given when there are really more options available. This attempts to drive the argument in a direction where only one specific answer can be given in order to incriminate the opposing party. Appeal to emotion. An appeal to emotion is when a writer or speaker uses emotion-based language to try to persuade the reader or listener of a certain belief or position. An appeal to emotion generally follows the logical form: X is true. Think of how sad you'll be if it's not true. Or think of how happy you'll be if it's true.
I've only done one formal debate in my academic career, and we had the forensics professor, and that's who teaches speech rhetoric debate teams at our school. And he was doing parliamentary debate, which is kind of a more formal debate where you have two people on each teams. They give their argument. There's a rebuttal, counter argument, rebuttal, etc. So it's very formal. You have a certain amount of time. And he asked me if I would come in and join a debate team to illustrate debating techniques to his class. And I was like, sure. And it was so interesting to me because I don't consciously know debating techniques, but I am an expert in my field of philosophy. So to me, it was a really interesting exercise to see someone who was an expert at debating pitted against someone who was an expert in a topic. And we were debating utilitarian ethics versus deontological ethics. In other words, ethical theories that it's the ends that justify the means, and those who say no, it's intention that matters more than outcomes. And so that was the debate we had. So if you're interested, I thought it was super interesting. And the other guy definitely had way much more technique than me, but I had so much more knowledge on the topic. You can decide for yourself which team you thought won. But I just thought it was such an interesting display of technique versus knowledge. Although I'm a quick learner, and when I realized our audience was our two combined classes, so we had about 30, 40 people in there watching this debate, I realized rather quickly that the way to get the audience on my side was to appeal to their Christian worldview and their emotions. And so I just started attacking like the ends justify the means and what else we could justify and how important intention is to God. Because I was looking at my audience. If I was debating this at San Diego State, I would have had to use completely different techniques. But I was doing these philosophical fallacies, appealing to emotion, appealing to authority, appealing to their worldview in order to sway the audience. And I don't know that I'm proud or not proud of it. It's just, that was a really interesting exercise for me. Comments, questions?
Actually, Fred.
Yeah.
That's actually how I negotiate most of the time with other people. I always do it or debate. I always have to go off of based where they stand. I personally would enjoy doing it based on logic and reason. Though with a lot of people, I have to do it based on emotions and feelings and stuff like that, which is often harder at times. Though I have to do it in order for them to understand. Like, I was having an argument with an evolutionist a long time ago, like maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I had to argue based on their side rather than my own side, because this made me kind of think of like one of my friends who had school at SDSU, and he was so annoyed that that a lot of people there were not Christian. And so he had the opportunity to do a paper and do a presentation. So he wanted to do a presentation at SDSU in a class with maybe like a couple hundred students that are all from SDSU, that are all majority not Christian, some of which are atheist. And he wanted to do his presentation solely focused on why they're wrong and why Christianity is the only way. And I had to persuade him that that was a terrible idea.
Excuse me one minute.
But Other than that, I had to use
No,
argue based on their side.
Okay. Here's some spicy pasta.
thanks.
Meat in it.
Sorry, Aiden. I had someone come to the door.
Oh, it's okay.
Not just the someone, my beautiful mother, but
I was just saying that I like have to argue based on their side and their perspective in order for them to see it, and can't argue from my own side due to my like perspective or whatever.
right.
So it's very, very fun.
Well, let's finish off this. I really am enjoying this young woman. She's basically going over the top 10. They correspond with the 15 we did on the other, but I always can use a refresher myself.
Example, I deserve a second chance to submit my assignment. This past week was so busy for me. I had football practice late every night. I had tons of homework in all my other classes, and my girlfriend and I just broke up. In general, what someone perceives to be unfair, how someone is feeling, or even things that someone might perceive to be moral or immoral do not carry much weight for making an objective argument. Equivocation. A fallacy of equivocation is when an argument is presented in an ambiguous, double-sided way, making the argument misleading. This is also known as a double-speak fallacy. Here's an example. Hot dogs are better than nothing. Nothing is better than hamburgers. Therefore, hot dogs are better than hamburgers. The word nothing in this case is used to refer to both not anything and all things. It's important to precisely define your words and be consistent with their usage.
Yes.
Bandwagon appeal. A bandwagon appeal is an appeal that presents the thoughts of a group of people in order to persuade someone to think the same way. It argues that one must accept or reject an argument based on peer pressure. Here are two examples. Many people buy extended warranties. Therefore, it is wise to buy them. My family holds this as truth. Therefore, everyone who disagrees is simply wrong. These are not strong arguments because they have no basis in fact. False analysis.
Hey, Professor Blackburn, I don't really hear the.
People are like dogs. They respond best to discipline. This is an absurd analogy that attempts to correlate people and dogs based on one minor similarity. I hope that this video was helpful. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe to our channel for further videos. See you guys next time.
Once. Okay. I lost my Zoom. I see Aiden there in the corner, but oh, there we go. All right. Well, we're out of time, but hopefully that was helpful for you. It just helps you be more precise, and especially if you're getting into more formal discussions, or if you're in an actual formal debate or something, people are going to call you out on that stuff. And I'll certainly call you out on them if I see you using them, but do the same for me. And I do want to end with this, though. Just because something is logical does not mean it's true or corresponds to reality. So just hold that in your mind. That doesn't mean that we should just throw logic out then, because it can't tell us what's true and what's not true. But what logic can tell us is if you are using reason correctly or incorrectly. But just because you're reasoning correctly does not mean you're arriving at the truth. And in fact, my favorite are the paradoxes. And there's one in the Bible that I think's great. And I forget the Cretan's name, but it was something like Cratylus the Cretan claimed that that Cretians always lie. Do you see the problem? Because if Cratylus is a Cretan and he's claiming Cretans always lie, means he must be lying, which means Cretans must sometimes tell the truth. But if Cretans sometimes tell the truth and Cratylus is saying all Cretans are liars, that must be a true statement. But if he's telling the truth, they can't be liars all the time. Does that make sense? A simpler one would be just to take a 3x5 card and write on one side, the other side of this card is true, and then flip it over and write the other side of this card is false. And you can have hours of entertainment with yourself and friends and family, flipping that card over and over. Okay. Go ahead, Aiden.
Another one that I've seen happen is like people play two truths and a lie, but instead they say 3 lies, and then they say 2 truths and a lie, or what they say, they have like 3 examples, and then afterwards, like, are any of these true or any of these lies? And they just say yes. So some must be true and some must be lies, or either or, but nobody ever really knows.
Right.
So.
And we'll get into that later. I think I did a little bit already. Maybe I didn't. This idea of instead of either or, which is how we're taught to think in the West, that law of non-contradiction. But in the East, they're not just looking at either or black and white, but they're trying to find a synthesis between the two. They're trying to see how things are included instead of excluded. And it's a very different mindset. And I'll explore that more with you later, because if you begin to realize the Bible is written much more from an Eastern perspective, way of thinking, rather than a Greco-Roman way of thinking. But the type of Christianity we have today in the West follows much more, it went through that Greco-Roman filter. And so we have a lot of Greek ways of thinking combined with Christian theology, at least in the West. And it's very different than, say, like a Buddhist or Indian Hindu type of mindset, and how they're seeing opposites may be very different how we're seeing them in the West. How, like in the East, the yin yang is part of one thing. It's not 2 totally separate things like we would see it in the West, but we'll get there. And I bring that up because postmoderns are thinking much more in an Eastern way than in a classical Western way, at least in our culture. All right, that was fun. I will see you, Lord willing, Monday.
Oh, hey, Fred, I have a quick question. So based on a couple examples, there's one that was like an authority